Hello, and welcome to another edition of What's Going On, a segment in which myself, ST Wickett, and Michael Curzon discuss stories that don't quite make it to print. Michael, we're here to discuss a story that if we'd brought up this time last year, we would have been called mentalists, conspiracy theorists, tinfoil hat wearers, liars, charlatans, snake oil salesmen, and as it turns out, the test of time has vindicated us both as well as everyone else who has said something similar. We draw attention to a tweet by our colleague Julian Yvonne, who has pointed out that due to the latest vaccine requirements in France, he is set to be basically just cut out of public life due to not having the vaccine. I've heard from other people who live in France that they face being fired from their jobs for not taking the vaccine. Can we now say that, at least in the case of France, and encroaching even more so into the UK, that was never going to be an optional procedure?
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that we're in the middle of July 2021 now. We're what is this now? 16, 17 months from the beginning of lockdowns, even longer if you look at countries like Italy and I believe France as well. And yet, rather than easing, as we were told would happen about this time, well, actually we were told it would happen about a year ago, but we were told again it would happen at this time. We seem to really be gearing up. And my first response upon reading what was happening in France and reading some of the media attention around it, quite harsh about what's happening there, was that actually this very same thing is happening in England too. So what's happened in France? We've seen that all healthcare workers have been told they must take a vaccine. We've also found out that restaurants, cafes, all indoor venues basically, and also interesting, I don't know if this is a mistake from the press, but it says hospitals. I imagine that just means hospital visits rather than treatment, but we wouldn't put it past them for that to be extended too. You can't enter any of these places in France unless you've got a COVID passport to show you've been vaccinated. Now, one of the catches is that you can also have on this pass proof of a recent test, but for the first time in France, they've started charging for these certain tests, which is a clear sign that this isn't about giving people a choice of different ways to prove that they are COVID safe in quote marks, but instead a way to force vaccination. And actually the very same thing is happening here. So we found out a few days ago ahead of the announcement for July 19th that the Freedom Day rhetoric was being toned down. That was a report in The Guardian. And boy, can we see why now, because not only have we already got the mandatory vaccination of some healthcare workers, which is very likely to extend to all healthcare workers, and also people who work in healthcare settings, so plumbers who go for a visit in a care home also face mandatory vaccination in this country. We've got that already. Now, we've also been told that all large indoor venues are going to be urged by the government, and it's going to be their social responsibility, Boris Johnson said, to introduce vaccine passports. So you can't enter these venues unless you've got a passport. This is all going to be reviewed in September, at which point it's been said that it could not only just be a choice for businesses to introduce this, and of course many will, but actually be mandated across indoor industries to force people to get a vaccine before going anywhere.
Even even if it isn't mandatory, as we said, the quote social responsibility is just code for pressure, right? Social pressure. There will be an official culture of pressure to take this thing.
Yeah, and it's the same with mask wearing. So we're told, oh, you no longer need to wear a mask after July 19th, or at least that was the rhetoric about a month ago. But now Boris says he expects and recommends that we carry on wearing masks. And of course, a host of businesses and transport groups have already said, you're not using us unless you wear a mask. There's a great cartoon, I believe by Blower in the Telegraph today, that's his pseudonym obviously, of a man walking out on Freedom Day without his mask with a big smile, and he walks past the local shop and sees everybody in a mask, and he walks past a cafe and sees you must wear a mask on the door, and he walks past a restaurant, sees the same, goes home on the bus, and again everyone's wearing masks, and maybe the conductor told him, oh, on this service he must wear a mask, and by the time he walks back home he's got one on himself, and he certainly doesn't feel anything close to free or indeed normal, which is what we're supposed to be returning to now. How many times have we heard we're in that last step now before normality? How many micro steps can we take before we get?
It's stick and carrot, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We never actually get closer. We just move further and further down the line in terms of time, and more people get harmed because of the continuation of mask wearing, because of the requirements for mandatory vaccination, which is a great emotional pressure, as well as sort of a pressure regarding whether or not we take something that, I mean, especially for us, we certainly don't need. And for older people might just decide for medical or personal reasons they don't want it. Immense pressure in all regards. None of it is easy.
Something that I want to draw attention to is the scale of what I would now say to be, you know, the mental abuse of this, where when Javid first came into the role in the health department, we heard, you know, a complete tone shift, right? Complete shift in rhetoric toward away from Hancock's, you know, COVID, basically just its thinly veiled COVID zero strategy to we have to live with this thing. This is part of our life now. We can't keep locking down every time as a minute surge in cases. And then it went back to they're going to require vaccinations to enter pubs, bars, whatever. And then an article yesterday that appeared on Politics for All said, you know, the government will scrap all restrictions from July 19th. And this is what's happening. They're shifting back and forth. It's constant flip flopping. It's weaponized discombobulation. You know, there's no doubt that this is. I think this is intentional. This is to cause so much confusion among the public that their backs just break and they just go fine, just do whatever. You know, it's the way they push and pull the hope of the public that they'll be able to go about their lives in freedom is nothing short of mental abuse at this point, and it's utterly despicable, and it's seemingly it can't be stopped at this point because. Yeah. Because the problem that we have now is that it isn't just the government doing this; it's the press and it's Silicon Valley that are pushing this too. There was a thing in when, you know, Twitter loves to, you know, inject a particular message into the conversation, right? There was you know, Twitter fact checkers, you know, debunked the idea that the requirement of vaccinations in a growing number of fields is actually not in contravention of the Nuremberg Code, because they said the vaccine has been tested. Well, that's not what the Nuremberg Code is about. It's not about whether it's tested or not. It's about whether it's mandatory or not.
Yeah,
it's forced. It's the forced participation in a medical procedure.
And I think what you said about, you know, the flip-flopping so that people are pushed into sort of accepting it is a really good point. And we saw this with travel too, where, you know, Portugal gets added to the green list. Thousands of Brits book their holidays. Then Portugal's scrapped off the green list onto the amber list, where you've got to do all the testing and the quarantining. But then you're told, actually, if you're fully vaccinated, then from next month you can go to an amber list country and not have to quarantine. So you end up thinking, I either stay at home and be miserable, and increasingly can't go to venues because of vaccination requirements, or I give in, take this vaccine, and carry on with life supposedly as normal after that. And I think you're right. It's all there just to push people into accepting the current state of affairs. We saw this in Israel, where they introduced vaccine passports and then dropped it after a few months. Once you know, mission was accomplished, essentially. And we're seeing the same here. But the question is, what level of vaccination do they require before they say, okay, that's high enough? We'll call it a day there. Does it ever get to a point, or do we carry on until, you know, 100% of people are vaccinated?
And then the question becomes booster shots, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
A new variant comes in that's vaccine resistant. Like this is so evidently to anyone who's actually looking and actually, you know, is capable of being skeptical about diktat, is that it's so obvious that this is the thin end of the wedge. There's so much more coming if this isn't met with valiant resistance from the public, and it's not going to be.
I think you adjusted there. It paused on you or something. I don't know if that was me or you.
Oh, sorry. I'll repeat it then. This is so obviously the thin end of the wedge, right? It's yeah, and more is coming, and the next few months are going to be pivotal, because if there isn't a serious public backlash, which at this point I really doubt there will be, because look, they were able to delay, you know, in quotes, Freedom Day 4 weeks with virtually no justification, with virtually no resistance, and the resistance that there was in the form of, you know, quite sizable public protests wasn't even covered.
Absolutely. And I think at this point, it's not just about, enough people will happily go along with what they're told. There's a lot of people who want this. I think even if we were told, right, okay, this is over, the pandemic's over, no more mask wearing necessary, no vaccine passports, that's ridiculous, it's illiberal and unfair, and conservative, of course. Let's carry on living lives as normal. There'd still be a massive proportion, if you believe the polling, or even if you just walk down the street and watch people, still be a massive proportion of people still wearing the masks, giving you the bad looks when you don't wear the mask, moving on to the opposite side of the road if you're not wearing one, and not wanting to socialize with you. And you see all these hack journalists and alleged personalities saying, well, I won't have any friends over who aren't fully vaccinated, no dinner parties with them. But actually, I get the impression that's a more common view than we'd like to think. That, you often get these questions: so have you had your first jab yet? And if you answer anything but yes, it's a sort of, right, why is that then? Okay, you're off the Christmas card list, is the sort of impression you get. So I don't even think this is, because of the campaign of fear which has taken place for the past year and a half now. I think it's gone beyond just being a result of government diktat. It's actually what the people want. This is sort of
yeah. See, that's the thing. I was talking about that with Luke Perry in the last week in review. The public have been so inundated with fear and terror at a constant basis that, like I said, they've now basically become white blood cells, right? They've now been reprogrammed to attack anyone who deviates from the norms in this sense, because they've been told that anyone who does deviate has blood in their hands, right? Like, you and I may as well be Slobodan Milosevic for all they know, you know. Yeah, it's honestly something. I generally trust my gut on a lot of things, and it's a gut feeling that's telling me to not stick my arm out and get jabbed. It's a gut feeling that's telling me to carry on resisting, and it's the same gut feeling that tells me that we are now on the precipice of something that is truly, truly ugly.
And that is what's going on.
Unfortunately so. I can sense our enthusiasm gently dwindling, though, with every episode we do, as the true scale of the current predicament slowly dawns upon us. Well, not slowly, but it just gets bigger and bigger every day, and it's
well, it's the toing and froing that does it. I think one day I'm writing, finally we're seeing an end to restrictions in a couple of weeks. We know we needed this earlier, but at least it's ending now, and we can finally get to normality. And the next week it's, well, actually, all that normality that we were told about won't be as normal as we once hoped, and it gets too boring. I mean, the news circuit is always boring anyway, because it's just so repetitive and contradictory. But this is just taking it to a massively grand scale. And you're right. I think there's only so much you can be infused to be against something. If up until the point that you completely realize this is carrying on regardless. But maybe our passions, that the last issue's review section was the longest yet, and another podcast series we're launching soon moves away from podcasts and towards the arts. So maybe that's the most important area we can place our emphasis and our time in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yes, less from what's going on and what went on 30 years ago.
Yes, that's quite nice. I like that.
Yes, well, we'll leave it there. That is what's going on. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Cheers.